All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our fourth weekly communications or COVID-19 communicators call. These calls are an opportunity for people to pose questions to one another and find solutions to challenges that people are having. In some cases, I think people find this call just reassuring to know they're not alone and to know that perhaps they're doing the best things that they could be doing. In other cases, I think people find them as a really valuable opportunity to reach out to communications professionals. I've got a really great team of communications professionals on the panel today. We always try to mix it up with a combination of large and small municipalities. Before I introduce them, I want to just point out to people that these calls are far more effective if the questions come early. So if there's something in particular, that's my phone, sorry folks. If there's something in particular, it's my mother actually. If there's something in particular that gets you motivated to come to this call, please get that into the chat window as early on in the call. The other option for you, because I know a number of municipalities have disabled the chat window, your other option is the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you just click on your screen, you'll see Q&A come up there. All right, so let us know why you're here. We've got our own thoughts of what we want to talk about today. Going around the room here, from larger municipalities to small, I think, is Patrick Caissie, Communications Director from York Region. Tony Iavarone, the Communications Director from the City of Waterloo. Lisa Caissie, Communications Manager, Director, I'm not exactly sure of your title, from the Town of St. John, New Brunswick. Welcome from New Brunswick. We do have people on the call from across Canada, so we really appreciate you having you here. Justin Bromberg is from Prescott-Russell, which is an interesting municipality of about 90,000 people covering 2,000 square kilometers. So that's a great perspective to have on the call. And lastly, Dana Van Allen. Dana's from Saugeen Shores. Saugeen Shores has been a regular on the panel, population of about 14,000 with a fantastic communications program. So we're always happy to have Saugeen Shores on here as well. All right, on that note, we don't have any questions coming in that I've seen. We do have almost 100 people on the call though, so we'll wait for those questions to come in. The first thing I want to talk about today is accessibility. And about 3 weeks ago when we had these first calls, we did get a lot of people asking about accessibility and what they should be doing to try to meet the requirements of Ontario's Accessibility Act. The message at that time was steam ahead and make sure you're communicating, but now we've had time to catch up. So I'm just throwing out to the panel there to see if you have thoughts on how you've been able to meet accessibility or whether that continues to be a challenge.
So if I can speak for Saugeen Shores, that's definitely been on our radar throughout. I know those very early days, like I'm thinking the first couple of videos that we did with our mayor, it was just him chatting. And so we didn't have things like captions and things like that because the point was just, get it out. After those first two, I believe, we did start doing things like captioning. Just found it really easy. So just to explain, I'm the communication specialist, and then I have a manager of strategic initiatives. So we're a very small team, so we don't have, kind of the captioning person, so that ends up being me. But yeah, so we started regularly captioning our videos in terms of PDFs and posting to the website. That's been something we've been working on kind of all along. And we have a great deputy clerk who keeps us on the straight and narrow in terms of accessibility for PDFs and anything that goes on the web. And then also just for social posts, we always try to do as much text and explanation that's on your graphic. So, you're not just posting a graphic that is telling the story, but you're also posting that in the text of the social media post too. And then doing all the things like alt texting and things like that on the actual website.
All right, so that's from a rather small team. I mean, that's really, you're kind of, I don't know when you sleep, Dana, but
Right over there.
Yeah. Any others on this matter of accessibility?
Yeah, I think, Brian, on the bigger picture of the legislation, there's a requirement for January 2021 to meet level AA. And at York Region, we had started this work to overhaul both of our York.ca and our internal portal platforms. And that work has stopped. And it's pretty unfortunate. We'd spent a lot of time getting our corporation on board with the approach that we wanted to take, got all of the approvals, had a ton of people ready to go. And this is really interesting work for a lot of folks, because they get to dive in, build a brand new site, bring on features that we know we need, our residents know that they need or require or asking for, but that work has to stop because it's all out on the pandemic front. We'll get back to it, but I think there'll be some sort of appreciation from the provincial folks that that legislation, we're not going to hit that early in 2021 as we had anticipated.
Yeah, I know, like on the accessibility front, one of the things that also surprises me is how the lack of plain language in the messages that we use right now. Practice social distancing. I mean, now people know what that is, but I wouldn't want to explain that in a long-term care facility, and that's really where the rubber's hitting the road on this fight. So we've been looking at that internally in terms of what can be done to kind of provide plain language examples of that. There was a great sign that went up in the City of Toronto parks that was showing what social distancing looked like in terms of 2 meters apart, or it was Ottawa. Ottawa is going to throw a shoe at me. It wasn't Toronto. But they had the Monty Python's Ministry of Silly Walks as the individual in the graphic of showing the difference. There was 3 different silly walkers. So people are having some fun with it, trying to make it a little more plain language, which is great, but I think that's part of the challenge. That also brings me to enforcement. Early on in the pandemic, people were saying, good time to go for a walk. Then it was, don't go for a walk. And now there are municipalities in the GTA that are fining people if they're in groups of more than 2 people. As we were talking before in the call, they're finding people at boat ramps, which is sending a lot of mixed messages in terms of what activities are allowed and what activities are not allowed. It's suffice to say that some of that enforcement is a communications exercise. People are they're ticketing people, and they're being open about ticketing people to try to get the message out of staying out of parks. And that's creating some social media backlash that we've also seen this week. So I'm just wondering what the panel's experience is in terms of, are you using enforcement as a way to communicate? And has that been a challenge for you in the past week in terms of people either not complying or reacting negatively towards that enforcement?
Brian, I'm happy to start on that one. City of Waterloo, we've had, pleased to say we've had good compliance from people. We're okay with people going out for a walk. We've been stressing the physical distancing, and we posted that throughout all of our, our open spaces and parks. But we've also done that at a regional level. The region of Waterloo consists of 8 municipalities, and so we've all been fairly consistent in that. Kitchener's had a bit more challenges, I would say, with groups gatherings, so they've had to be a bit more strict around that. So they are having difficulty with people dispersing, but the rest of us have been fortunate enough that people are observing that. So we've done that really strongly through a lot of social media messaging. The media has been very good for carrying that message forward, but to this point, as of yesterday, we haven't had to issue any tickets. People have been compliant.
All right. Any other examples there?
Brian, in Prescott and Russell, it's largely been a similar experience. I think for the large majority, and the large majority of people have really been respecting the social distancing measures and the messaging that's been going out. Our elected officials for them have also been reiterating that same message. And in one case, our warden here in Prescott and Russell is even posting videos on a regular basis and messaging on his personal account, just reminding people of the importance of staying home and really just keep hammering that message home. So for the most, really people are being compliant, and enforcement has not been an issue. We also, in one particular case, we manage a large swath of managed forest land called the La Rose Forest. It's 11,000 hectares, 27,000 acres. And that is always closed around this time of the year for the spring thaw period. But we have advised people that that may be prolonged depending on what the outcome of the situation is, and that has had mixed reactions from some members of the public who are saying, well, you know, it wouldn't the safest place to be right now be going for a walk in the forest as opposed to in my neighborhood. So we've had a bit of challenges dealing with some of that response, and it's really not about not wanting to let people walk in the forest. It's just that we can't be there to enforce social distancing measures in a 27,000 acre piece of forest land. So you know, it's just, I think, trying to it's the sympathetic and the understanding in the communication that goes a long way in these times, and that it's not. It's also that we're very close to urban areas, and if people decide from to start descending from Ottawa or wherever else, to just start going for walks in large numbers in the forest, we can't control that either. So we really do have to be vigilant. And I think, again, for the most part, people have been very understanding.
I've seen this play out of, you know, why are they issuing tickets? Why haven't they had a warning? Why don't they put up barricades? Why are they moving to enforcement? When the reality is, I think we've tried messages, we've tried signs, we've tried barricades, and now people are resorting to tickets. But I'm wondering, you know, in a situation like your forest, are you blockading parking lots? Are you signing parking lots? Or are you getting the message out to the community in other ways?
Yeah, Brian, we did close our regional forest. We mentioned that on the call last week, a week ago Saturday. We have 21 public access points to the forest. We have, you know, done our best to close those off with barricades. Some have gates to them. We brought in some other barricades, signage, things of that nature. That has been and continues to be probably the biggest flashpoint with our residents. You know, not a lot of happy people, but you know, at the same time, when the province, the feds, the regions, the municipalities are all encouraging people to stay at home as much as possible. Only go out for, you know, essentials and groceries and medication back home. We felt that that's the best approach to do. And from an enforcement standpoint, it's impossible to enforce that. So you know, you give people the message that it's closed, and the majority will go along with that. But it's
right. In the City of Waterloo, we've also enhanced our visibility. So we've got a lot of our bylaw folks. We brought in private security as well as our environment and parks people in marked vehicles, going through open spaces, going through parks. So we find that's been quite effective as well, just being visible.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions coming in, and we will get to those questions. So if you feel like asking us questions, fire away. We will get to that list. Just before we move into some of the questions that are coming in, I'm also curious about enforcement officers. There has been a lot of complaints I've seen in the GTA about these enforcement officers going around. And what really strikes me is that these bylaw officers really do not want to get close to anyone. And we, you know, we're looking at a situation in New York where 2,000 police officers have been infected with COVID or confirmed, and 20 police officers have passed away. So I'm wondering how that plays out in terms of the conversations that you're having with some municipal employees, particularly on the front line, and some of the really difficult conversations that you've had to have, and what strategies you're using there to have discussions with paramedics and firefighters and police officers and that sort of thing. And particularly if there has to be, whether you had to change an approach with those audiences at all over the past couple of weeks as this thing has really kind of become more real for people. Anything from anyone on the panel there?
I'll say from a public health standpoint, you know, certainly as everybody knows, there's you know, critical issues in our long-term care homes and the group homes. That's a national issue. I know that through our medical officer of health, he had actually requested some staff to go in to some of these places, and not only to educate, also sort of investigate almost, you know, how they're using their PPE and what sort of measures are they taking. So it's as much an education for our own staff to course correct. But you know, we do have a lot of staff that are interacting with the public, and you know, I think the term hero gets thrown around far too easily. I watch a lot. I used to watch a lot of sports. You would hear that term a lot. But from folks that are on the front lines, from, you know, public health or paramedics, police, fire, they are truly doing heroic work.
All right, anyone else on that? Okay, I'm going to move us over to some of the questions we've coming in with the panel. One of the questions we have here is about Facebook Live and town halls. For those who have hosted Facebook Live town halls in the past, are there any key themes or questions during those town halls that have come up often? We're looking to host town halls for residents and one for businesses with our mayor. We want to make sure that it's as comfortable as possible, and it will be their first time using Facebook Live. So the first thing that strikes me on that question right away is that you can do tests with Facebook Live, and you can have an audience of one with Facebook Live. And so there's ample opportunities there for you to do run-throughs using it. I can say that my own municipality in Mississauga has used very elaborate public town hall meetings. And I've been struck by the number of questions that really are about people wanting to know how they can report on their neighbors and complaining about lack of social distancing, which some of those questions are delicate. So that is one question I'd want to be prepared for. But I'm curious about the panel members. Have any of you been using Facebook Live in particular as a platform?
No.
So it looks, no, it has been. I know that where I would go for this on examples that I'm aware of where Facebook Live has been used extensively. One great example would be Bracebridge, and the mayor of Bracebridge, I'm going to have a mental block here, but Graydon Smith uses Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram very, very effectively. He's a former radio announcer. So he's comfortable in those formats, and my sense is that you could both see best practices in Bracebridge, and you'd be able to get samples of past work. Some other examples are coming through on the chat board, which is great. St. Catharines, Niagara-on-the-Lake, all talking about success with Facebook. What I would ask is if you're on this call and you're using Facebook Live and you have information to share, please type that up in the chat box, and then folks can follow up with you individually to get examples of how you're using it. All right, another question that come up, just going to the Q's and A's that have come in. Regard to mayors using messages, one of the questions is, are you putting captions using YouTube? And I know in some cases these videos, and we do recommend often that these videos get posted directly to the platforms where they're being used. So instead of a YouTube video being put on Twitter, we would like a video that goes straight to Twitter. And there are basic video apps that you can use to make sure that you get those captions in without having to rely on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So just some thoughts there with folks in terms of putting captions on mayor's videos or the simple videos that you're doing. Are you adding captions, and what tools are you using to get those captions on there?
We had, as I talked about, we discovered Subtitle Horse. So if you just Google Subtitle Horse, it's there's a fully functioning program, but you can also just use the free program. I think you can have like 3 ongoing projects at a time, and it will create the SRT file, which you can then upload to post the native video in Facebook, in Instagram. For some of the longer videos, you do it on IGTV, but the same thing, you can use the captioning there too. For Twitter, we're still doing the link to the YouTube video, just because I think the native Twitter video has a length of 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So for a couple of the addresses that the mayor's given, we've done it just on YouTube. But yeah, Subtitle Horse, I can't recommend it enough because it's super easy to use, and yeah, it's
if you get a chance, Dana, can you just type that into the chat box? We love the correct spelling of it.
Yep.
Another app that I know we're using a lot for video these days is probably LumaFusion, which again allows you to. We use iMovie, GoPro Splice. We use LumaFusion. Most of these will give you that capacity to get the captions included, and then make sure that video is sent up to a format that makes sense. Your safest format, of course, is if you go to a 1-to-1 ratio, which is a square box ratio. It'll work on any social media platform if you're pressed for time. So that's another option as well. All right. Just going back to the questions we're getting in, I think there's one that we are missing. Oh, this is really core to the call, but it's always a good question. What is the biggest challenge that communications folks have encountered in this pandemic, and what lessons have you learned? So a very global question there. This is the Barbara Walters question. Folks, what are your thoughts there on the biggest challenge you've come across and the lesson you've learned? Lisa, you wanted to add?
Sure, I'll start with that. As a municipality here in New Brunswick, of course, we are not the lead on the response. We are the lead in communicating with our residents, but not on the overall response under the state of emergency. That does sit right now still with the public health. So we are following their lead. One of the biggest challenges I've had personally is staying in my own lane. So making sure that I'm not doing or saying any more than I need to or should say, and focusing people back to the source with their questions, because we have a natural tendency as communicators to want to answer everything and be the go-to body, whether we are or not. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges. Another challenge, and I've had to take actually staff to task on that too. We've had our city manager and mayor and others say, Lisa, do this, or let's do this, or why aren't we doing this? And you have to remind them that it isn't our place or to do that, right? And to really stay in your lane. So that's a common term that we've started using internally and calling each other out for it. Not in a malicious way at all, but just as a friendly reminder. The other is that when it comes to discretionary decision making, so what I mean by that is our province, our motto here in New Brunswick is exercise, don't socialize. So we are encouraging, and the province is encouraging people to maintain healthy states of mind and body, and to get out in their own neighborhoods for walks, cycles, runs, whatever it is you're able to do, but not gather in any form of group. Now, that's gone well here. Only 2 days after they announced that, they closed provincial parks. So then we said, okay, well, should we be closing municipal parks? And they said, you don't have to. We'll leave it up to your own discretion. So that's a very difficult thing to communicate to the public, is why is the province doing this and the municipalities not? On that note too, the province of Nova Scotia has closed their municipal parks and we haven't. So some of that can be very challenging to communicate to people, is why are we making these decisions and are they actually in the best interest of the community? So what we've found to be helpful there is that at least so long as we can maintain alignment with the other municipalities within the province. So if we can say, okay, as municipalities within the province, we're going to keep parks open, then we've been able to declare some success, I guess, in our communication. If one municipality decides to close and another doesn't, that's when we start running into issues, and we start to see some heavy criticism coming down. Because of course there's two camps. There's those who want to be able to get out and exercise, and those who think that we should just be staying within our homes.
And certainly we've noticed that in the GTA with varying enforcement, where some municipalities are enforcing very aggressively and other ones are standing back, and the public's getting a bit confused. Patrick, you wanted to add? Yeah,
sorry to talk over you there, Brian. I was some interesting points there about staying in your lane and things, and that's those are good reminders for everybody. I would say that I'm generally never in my lane. I think over the last month I've been so far out of it that it may be the new normal. But you're right, as it relates to what one municipality does, that coordination of issues, that's probably a lesson learned both federally, municipally, provincially. Different directives that have come out that's sort of supersede or take over decisions that had or have not been made. I think the other big lesson learned is just, we're working in real time here, and people want information so fast, so instantaneously. They want the information, as soon as it's being received, and maintaining that level is a difficult pace, and that's generally when you work at that speed, that's when errors happen as well, unfortunately.
Brian, if I could just add, in our region, we've got a regional two-tier system. So we've got the region of Waterloo and 7 smaller municipalities. And so from day one, we've had a CEO control group and a regional pandemic group. And that cohesion and that coordination amongst all the municipalities has been huge. And I think it's really saved us from having a lot of tension that might have otherwise arisen from people saying, well, hey, how come Cambridge is doing that and you guys are doing this? So we've been very consistent, very coordinated in all of our decisions, but also in the communication and the timing. Sometimes that's a little bit, slows it down a little bit because you got to make sure everybody's ready at the same time. But I think it's worth the price when decisions are very consistent. So people travel throughout the region. We've got contiguous borders. So people may work if they're still going to work in one city and live in another. So the things that we're doing are consistent from one municipality to another.
I will say, just before I go to Justin there, one of the realities about Kitchener-Waterloo, though, Tony, as an observation, is that your group of municipalities always works well together as a team. And that is not always, we'll say that you do it to a greater degree than other places that I've seen. So the other thing I would think about is whether there's thoughts on strategies on how to work with your neighboring municipalities when it's tough, and whether you're doing any sort of communication coordination among different communications managers, to make sure that there is some coherence across a region, for instance. But I didn't want to cut off Justin there. Justin, you had a comment?
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. No problem. I just wanted to echo some of the comments of my my counterparts here, and then say that I think in general, one of the biggest general challenges has just been to really stay on top of all of the changes, and it's the nature of the situation, and we're all living with it, and it's all on the fly, but the information is changing rapidly, and as Patrick pointed out, the expectations to stay on top of that information and to disseminate that information in a timely fashion are very high. So it's the expectations are there for sure on the part of our residents. And to give a couple of examples, I think it's just in terms of staying on top of the changes. It's once the Premier announced a few weeks ago that gatherings of 5 or more people were prohibited, but that 5 or less people could still go on. There was a similar communique that went out from the health unit that said private daycares could continue to have their daycares open as long as there were 5 or less children in the building, and we shared that information to advise people, and then the outrage and the outpouring of concern were saying, why is it okay, and how are we supposed to enforce social distancing amongst children in daycare, and this is unrealistic. And it's something that doesn't necessarily pertain to the municipality, but we are suddenly dealing with communications issues that we're not necessarily used to responding to. And another example was our region is located just on the border of Quebec, and sort of a cottage country, the Laurentian Mountains area. And on April 1st, the provincial police in Quebec decided to close off, the government of Quebec decided to close off certain regions in close to Montreal, and particularly where people were going to cottages. And so the portion of Quebec just to the north of where we are was shut down, and there was a police presence put up, but yet the reverse was not done for Ontario. So there was a lot of concern, confusion, and outrage in some cases as to why it was okay for Quebecers to continue coming into Ontario, but it was not okay for Ontarians to go into Quebec. So again, a police provincial issue, but one that often comes back to the local region or the local municipality to have to try to communicate to its residents, because we are that front line of communication for them. So again, staying on top of the changes has really been, generally speaking, a huge challenge.
All right, thank you. I'm going to move over to one of the questions we've had coming in, and I'm going to pose another one to all the participants on the call. Just if you could weigh in on this one on the chat box, if you can. And not everybody has access to the chat box, because some municipalities have disabled that function in Zoom. You may be able to put it in the Q&A section, possibly, but it really pertains to Zoom. I'm wondering if any folks on this call have had problems with Zoom calls being bombed or invaded, which is always a possibility, I think, when you do these kinds of calls, whether that's actually been a problem for any participants on this call. And then a little later, we may get a poll question up there. You may see it pop out on your screens, just wondering which platform you use. You'll get at least one poll question during this call, so you may see that one. And then, so if folks can just weigh in, at this point, I haven't seen anybody posting to say that they have had a problem with Zoom or any other platforms being bombed, but we're curious to see if you're getting that. The question that came in was, how do we communicate with seniors, particularly in rural areas? I think communicating with seniors is difficult all the time. I did a Zoom call with my mom. Most of that was up her nose, to be frank with you. And, you know, that's a call that worked. So anyway, I'm just curious, so thoughts about reaching seniors and what's worked and what lessons learned.
In terms of a rural setting, I know that our local radio stations have actually been really great at communicating messages both from the town as well as Bruce Power, the big nuclear facility. They had hosted a town hall in conjunction with the Greybrooth Health Unit. So they had, it was an online town hall, but they also had the audio broadcasted by the radio stations as well. And so people could submit their questions ahead of time. And the chief, the medical officer of health was answering them, and just over the radio, which, you know, is accessible to virtually everybody. So yeah, I think that those kind of partnerships with local media, more traditional media outlets is really important. Even our small community newspaper too. It's just finding some of those other avenues of communicating with people. So it's not all, you know, Facebook Live chats, that there's also that maybe just audio component, especially when it comes to rural internet access and things like that too.
So we had another example on on one of the previous calls where a municipality had a list for shoveling driveways, and they adapted that list of shoveling driveways to reach out to seniors, which I thought was a practical example.
Nice.
Any other thoughts that people have on reaching seniors? Lisa?
Yeah, I just have two tangible examples of that. We have flyer delivery service still active here in the Maritimes. It's been a bone of contention for some because for the most part it is just that, it's flyers. But the province is looking now at delivering information through the flyer delivery service. So that would be pamphlets, brochures, that type of thing. And we do know that most homes receive that service. It's an opt-out service right now. So by default, everyone gets the flyers. And so that's one way. A second way, and it's maybe an innovative solution for some idea, is that we host our Common Council meetings virtually every second week, every second Monday. And we have our Emergency Operations Center activated to a level 2, which is just a partial activation, and have since the middle of, or near the end of March, I guess, mid to end of March. So every second week during those council meetings, we have a live operational brief period from the Emergency Operations Center. So those of us within that command and operations structure participate, and we're required to give a 2 to 3 minute brief live to the council. Rogers Television televises that, which comes on right after the bingo for seniors. So most of them have been getting their information that way, and what we are expected to give a recap every second week. So my communications brief is just that. It's a recap of what's happened over the last 2 weeks from the municipal standpoint. So I believe that's been helpful for seniors.
And is that in English and French? Do you have is it in English only?
It is in English only, yes.
Okay.
Brian, I think one of the things you're seeing is the partnerships coming to life, you know, in times of need, in times of crises. At York Region, we're a 2-tiered municipality, so the region being the upper tier and our 9 cities and towns being the local municipalities. The partnerships, the work that's going on at all levels is amazing. You know, it will only stay with us post-pandemic. I always remind our staff and people that we work with, we're very close to the city of Toronto, so the Toronto media often don't pay attention as closely to York Region as perhaps we think or they might. But I always remind staff that you know, in times of you know, in need, they'll be there. So great partnerships with the media, both locally and you know, the larger markets. We've been able to partner with 105.9 The Region to have Dr. Kurji have 2 video and audio updates through the radio station twice a week, Mondays and Fridays, or Tuesdays and Saturdays. We tape Mondays and Fridays, and they go live Tuesdays and Saturdays. So again, these partnerships that come out, and hopefully we'll be able to maintain and build on those even further down the road.
Yeah. If I may, Brian, the collaboration has been excellent for the large part. I think everybody's been coming together across municipal and cross-platform. The media has been picking up on a lot of the messaging that's been going on, and councillors and mayors. We've got 8 townships in our area, and we've all been on the same message. All municipalities have been putting out their own messaging. And I do find that I can speak for our rural area. I'm quite pleasantly surprised with the response and the involvement and the participation on Facebook. We were lucky that we spent the last few years building up our presence on Facebook, and we've got close to 7,000 followers. So for a region of 90,000 people and 30-some thousand households, it's quite good. And it's been the vehicle by which we've used largely to get our messaging out, and the interactions and the comments and the feedback, the sharing has been really popular. And I would say even among seniors, and one method that was really helpful with respect to our long-term care facility is that we had a lot of families who wanted to visit their loved ones, following the closure of these long-term care facilities. So we set up a messaging system whereby the recreation staff of the long-term care facility would take appointments. People could phone in or send their request on Facebook Messenger especially over the Easter weekend. We were encouraging people to send us their messages or call in there, and we would either set up a phone line in the resident's room, set up an iPad with FaceTime capabilities. So the response to that has been huge. People have really appreciated it. And it's been another way of trying to connect people in a rural area. And we do have an aging population, and so there's technology has not been as much of a barrier as I might have thought it would have been. So that's been a pleasant surprise in these circumstances.
So I think the example that you're providing there, I'd encourage if you're from a rural municipality and you want to see a good example of social media use. Dana and Saugeen Shores, it's the reason why Saugeen Shores is always here, is a good example. And Prescott-Russell is another. Quite frankly, your Facebook page does a beautiful job of capturing those stories simply. And I've got it, and it's clear to me that a lot of the pictures and images that you're getting to capture those stories are coming from the field. And this is another thing we've noticed, is that some municipalities are doing a better job of rounding up photographs that tell the story and allow people to thank employees. Some are doing that better than others. And it doesn't take a lot. Usually it's cell phone quality photos that get the job done. But it's a moment of somebody taking the time to get a picture of a service that we may take for granted and make sure that that's getting out. So we certainly noticed that some municipalities are on top of that more so than others. And Prescott-Russell is a place where you can go to a Facebook page and see that in action, certainly. There's a couple of questions that have come through related to virtual council meetings and the video council meetings. So one of those questions was, can we add captions to a council meeting? And I'm wondering if that is something that you folks have been doing, and if so, if you have been using any tips or tools or secrets to make that happen. Other question we get a lot is, what was the software that Dana was talking about? So that's related. I think it's Subtitle Horse. Is that what you were using?
Yeah. So subtitle-horse, HORSE.com.
And have you applied that to a council meeting, or have you used other means to get captions on council meetings, or is that happening where you are?
Yeah, we haven't done that yet. The mayor's videos, I think the longest one he did was like a 6-minute address. So that's more manageable to subtitle. We haven't done it with the with the council meetings yet, just because they're that much longer. But yeah, and I'm not exactly sure what kind of tools you would use for like live captioning them. But yeah, if you're posting them online afterwards, you could definitely caption them too.
Anyone else on the panel have an experience with putting captions to council meetings? Okay, so it's probably just a matter of time before we get that accessibility question from an issues management standpoint. That's another question I think you want to be ready for. is why isn't that service available? And there's going to be reasonable answers that you can provide there, but you don't want to have an and on moment on that one. That question is probably coming to you at some point. One of the other questions we got related to council meeting is password protection. When you send out information to the public about a council meeting, are you password protecting the access to council meetings or not? Is anyone aware of what your municipality is doing? It's more of a clerk's question than a communications manager's question, but I know there's probably a pile of clerk/communications people on this call. So thoughts on password protecting access to council meetings?
Ryan, we have our first council meeting April 27th. We're not password protecting it, but we are asking people to send in questions in advance to clerks.
Okay. Someone's
Brian,
making
Your clerk region, we
suggestion
have the
here.
ability, sorry, Brian, we have the ability to live stream. So we did a virtual meeting of council a couple of weeks back. And so that was a virtual Zoom meeting, but we were able to live stream that through our regular channels externally.
Okay. Somebody suggested rev.com. I don't know if that's the energy drink or a website. So maybe a little more context there, but I think that is related to helping with council meetings. If I'm following the bouncing ball there. There's a number of the feedback's coming in, by the way, on breaches on Zoom. They seem to be rare, which is good. We may get a poll up here from Brittany in a moment on whether or not we have we want to get a sense of who's using, whether you're using Zoom more than GoToMeetings or other platforms. So we want to get a sense of how prevalent Zoom is. It certainly was prevalent coming out of the gate. We want to see if that's shifted at all. One of the other things, just if you're on this call and you want to get on to future calls, the other thing I will do is put in a plug. Here's one of the poll questions that's coming up. You can move this box around on your screen, so we'll leave it up there for a bit. Once you've voted, you can let us know, but we do want to take stock of whether or not these calls are helpful. If the calls are helpful, we'd also ask you to help share the word that they're going on. The easiest way to do that, quite frankly, is to, we really have two options. If you are the communications manager for your municipality, we can add you to a municipal communicators list that AMO maintains, but AMO only maintains one communications person per municipality on that call. So Patrick Caissie may be the only person who would be on that call from York Region. If it's anyone else in the municipality that you want to add, your best bet, it just is the way it is to go to our Redbrick website and to register for the Redbrick Communications Network, because we send these call invitations out to everybody on our network. So if you're a parks manager and you want to get on the call, we direct you to the Redbrick network. If you're a communications director or a designated person for municipality, you end up on the AMO list. To get onto that AMO list, you also use the COVID-19 page at AMO, and they have a COVID-19 email address at AMO for these matters, and all past calls that we've done are posted on that section of the COVID-19 webpage. All right, so with that out of the way, if you haven't voted, please do. It looks like people want to have a call. I don't think anybody has said that we don't need to have another. So bad news for the panelists. And a number of people have volunteered to be panelists. If you want to be a panelist, if you're interested in that, drop me a line and let me know. Or go to that COVID-19 AMO email address, and all of that information should be on your invite. And we welcome different perspectives from different municipalities, so we'd be happy to look at that. All right, the next question I want to look at is there anything that you will be doing differently going forward? And one of the things there is, I mentioned on the last call, I get a number of people that are selling me things. Like they're trying to sell us new apps and new approaches and everything else. And I find it kind of amazing, because who's got time to try something new or to gamble with something new? But it is an interesting question, whether or not you've felt a need to make a significant shift in your communications program, or whether you're just using the stuff that you know and doing that as well as you can. So I'm curious if people have made a major adjustment to the way they communicate, or if they're about to.
One of the things that we've done, Brian, is we made a change to our web postings. So we, with our public health folks and our DAVS folks and IT, created an interactive dashboard to better reflect all of the information that we have as it relates to cases, testing, fatalities, unfortunately, resolved cases, outbreaks. And we were posting this information twice a day at 10:45 and 5:45 to our media partners. And it was sort of a running tally of cases, and it wasn't sustainable. So we switched to a more interactive dashboard approach, posting that information once a day at 5 o'clock. It certainly helps us. It certainly helps from a staff management standpoint. Some members of the media maybe not so much happy with the change because they were used to getting the information a certain way and twice a day, but it wasn't sustainable. So that was a significant change that we did at the beginning of this week, late last week. I think it was before the Easter long weekend. So from a load management standpoint, good for us. And there's lots more information in there, but when media sort of are trained to receive it a certain way, they don't like the change. But we were able to work through that.
All right. Anyone else using anything differently? I'm seeing participants on the call are starting to weigh on this. The one reference there is they've adopted the use of Canva. That is something, if you haven't used Canva before, that is so simple and easy that you'll be up and running in no time. It is one of those apps or software tools that we recommend. Another person has suggested more information on this Rev product. Rev is used to create transcripts from videos. That's a little expensive, but the clerk is using them for minutes, and they're uploading the transcripts of those minutes to YouTube videos. So that's interesting information. Anyone doing anything differently or has made a shift in the way they communicate?
Just actually over the weekend, we had a really great success with Good Friday. Our local fish and chip, one of our local fish and chips places, there was a water service break, and they were unable to prepare these fish and chips meals, takeout meals for people for Good Friday. And so I heard about it from our director of infrastructure and development, and she emailed just a quick success story. That Public Works was on the scene. They cleared it all up in time for these 60 orders of fish and chips to get out to waiting people. And so we did just a little social media post about that, and it took off. So it's like just those very small stories that have such an impact on the community. So I'm hoping to encourage all of our both council members and staff to send those along, because we share them here and there, but I think right now this is the time that people want to be seeing that a lot, and there are so many shares and so many likes. And I think that this store, the restaurant, had sold out by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon because people were just, that's the place. So so just encouraging people to send those positive stories as well. So we're not just always blasting with closures and regulations and things like that.
So we've also got one of the participants on the call said that they've set up a media monitoring service, which they didn't use before. They're using Cision. The other major one we hear a lot is Meltwater. I'd be curious if there's any other services that people are using in terms of media monitoring. I will say on the media monitoring front, my experience with those services are a bit like, are you with Bell or are you with Rogers? People use Rogers for a while and they get frustrated and they switch to Bell, then they get frustrated for a while and they switch to Rogers. So I'd be curious if people have had great experiences with media monitoring and if they wanted to share who's providing that service. But my experience is that results on it are mixed and it's fairly expensive. But thoughts from the panel on media monitoring that don't get us sued by anybody?
There's also
I think that's the other question I'd have is it a really vital tool for you, or is it just something that you have and it sometimes is handy?
In my experience, Brian, is that they've not been as the there are some benefits to it, but for the most part, they don't seem to capture, in my case anyway, a lot of the local news feeds or newspaper articles that are posted around here. So we've tried a few, with mixed results, but as a whole, I think that we're better off continuing to do our own monitoring of local news media. If we know where to look for those things, yeah.
That's been my experience as well. I mean, from media relations support for AMO, we find that the coverage is too spotty for us. And while they sometimes find things that surprise us, the reality is our local ears to the ground often do a better job, and it can provide its own surprisingly good results. And the other reality is just Google searches are often very effective. Just setting up a Google search is often very effective at getting us the usual suspects that we're looking for. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on media monitoring and how vital it is right now?
Yeah, I would say between like a Google alert and just using Hootsuite or something to follow the feeds or hashtags of your local media. That's how you're hearing, in terms of our municipality anyway, that's how you're getting the ear to the ground. I've used the media monitoring, the full-fledged software in other positions, and it does give you that really broad picture of what's happening in an industry or something, but for the day-to-day, it comes with a caveat that like you need someone to be media monitoring every day too. So, and like, what are you doing with that information once you've seen it, you know? So right now, in terms of our municipality, we don't have that bandwidth, and so tools like Hootsuite and Google Alerts are a lot easier to keep track of.
A number of people have been putting recommendations in the chat box, and I just point out that you have a choice of sending it to the panelists or sending it to panelists and attendees. You may want to look at just sending it to all participants and attendees. That's going to be helpful to folks. And if you could also let us know what municipality you're from. So a lot of people are saying, we're using this and it's great. That's fantastic. Can we know who you are so that other people can follow up with you afterwards? All right. I'm curious about communications in the week ahead. About 2 weeks ago, I alerted folks you should get your head around labor issues. And I suspect that a number of you really have been dealing with some very difficult labor issues. That will probably continue. The other one that really strikes me is the warmer weather is coming and enforcement is probably going to get more difficult. That being said, the numbers, we seem to be flattening the curve. So that also begs the question of how do we communicate with the public in a way that sustains social distancing for the long haul when the results start going down for cases. I'm wondering what communications challenges you're starting to get your head around or on the horizon for you that you feel you need to start to prepare for.
Brian, the one we're working on is, sorry to interrupt,
no, go ahead.
Around events. So we announced yesterday that events on municipal property are being canceled up to June 30th, and we'll make a decision later this week on rec programs as well. So that's what we're getting a lot of interest on the part of the community on what's happening with those things. So we're trying to bring some clarity on that to at least the June 30th time period. So that's what we're working on this week.
I think a number of municipalities have done the same thing. I'm seeing a consistent pattern where the dates of either June 30th or July 4th have been thrown out as all public events are canceled up until that moment. I haven't heard any other dates thrown around other than that window.
I think something to be mindful of is the provincial emergency declaration, and they're pushing that out another 28 days and that's to about the middle of May. So that's something to follow and to see if they'll continue to push that out at another 2 week cycle after that, because those types of decisions are going to force some of these local decisions. And everybody's right as it relates to the weather, and things get a little nicer, and you compare that against perhaps the curve being flattened somewhat. There'll be this push to resume society and bring that back online, and what that looks like, nobody really knows. But I think it's safe to say that when that does start to happen, it will be a staggered approach. But when that happens, that's very hard to say. And I think it's a longer period of time than a shorter period of time.
I'm just going to flag, we've got about 5 minutes left. Of any last questions, please send them through. Brittany, if you've got that poll related to what platforms people are using, feel free to throw that up. There it is. Thank you, Brittany. It's magical. Thank you. So we'd like your feedback on what platforms you're using for these kinds of video calls and whether that'll continue. So that's really what we're looking for there. The poll is still up for whether these calls should continue, but if you hate these calls, you're probably out of luck. Most people seem to be saying they should carry on, so noted. Just other things you're seeing on the horizon and things that you're preparing for next week. I didn't want to cut people off there. Lisa?
We've got a few things. We've got, I'd mentioned to the panelists earlier, every year, at least for the past two, we've experienced some significant flooding along our river system that impacts much of the province, and in particular two of our major cities, one being the capital city, which is Fredericton, and St. John, where we are. So looking to see there what we need to do and how to best respond to that to keep people safe and to support them, because we do see a number of businesses and homes flood during that time. A lot of that work will take place with the Red Cross as well for any required evacuations of those areas. But in some cases, even working with the province to get permits turned around quickly to build up infrastructure, so roadways to maintain access to those areas that the past 2 years have been choked off due to flooding. The last thing we really want to do is have to evacuate thousands of people into hotels or shelters that aren't even available at this point in time, because we've got a lot of our homeless population in those shelters. So one thing for communications that I'm really looking at with my team is what is our depth for that. So if we have two converging emergencies here, how do we manage through that, and how do we cut through the noise so that we're using the same platforms for different stakeholders, right? So to make sure that those who need the information are getting the information as quickly as possible. So that's likely going to be an issue we deal with here in New Brunswick in the coming weeks.
You look surprisingly alert and awake for everything you have on your plate. For those that don't know, for context with Lisa, St. John's kind of a standalone city that has everything that a large city would have. I think you're responsible for communicating something like 40 departments, and you're by and large a communications team of one. So how you're dealing with flood, COVID, and everything else, I don't know. Have you ramped up your communications team at all? Have you been able to find other resources to support you?
Redbrick, yes.
So that's not a plug, but I'm just wondering, I mean, your eyes should be a lot more red than they are. So I'm wondering how that's all going.
I think, I have relied more on contract support for some of this stuff. We also have we've got a structural deficit that we're trying to deal with as well. So for the years 2021 and 2022, we have some challenges that lie ahead and some restructuring plans that were well in the works before this happened that we need to continue with in order to implement in time to address the deficits. So we do have a lot. We've got a large industrial makeup here in St. John. We are also on the harbor, so we're on the Atlantic Ocean, on the Bay of Fundy. So that comes with its challenges too. I think in times like this, that you have to you realize that you can't be everything to everyone and take it all on and survive, even yourself. So rely on the resources that are available to you, and without finding any shame in that, because that's what I've had to do is broaden my team, not just with those that I have. I do have one within my office who's able to offer some support, but contract services have been a lifesaver for me here. One, just really quickly, I don't know if the other cities are experiencing this or not, but flushable wipes are a huge issue for us, and they always have been. But this is a really good opportunity right now to get that message out, because I know that a lot of the time our folks aren't listening, and they see flushable on the packaging, and people have pretty much wiped out all the grocery stores for wipes, and they're flushing them seemingly non-stop right now. And we have experienced in the last week alone 3 fairly serious sewage backups because of it. So we're going to be taking that message. We already have, but we're going to be taking it out even harder right now and hoping that it'll maybe even bring about some lasting changes with these manufacturers who claim these wipes to be flushable.
Mhm.
All right, so I'm going to round it up on that note. My next call actually today is with the Ontario Clean Water Agency, so we will tell them to send us all of their stuff on wipes and help get that message out. That's a good one. Another piece that came in on the chat group there was the need to start looking at infrastructure projects that will start to carry on now as spring road work and those sorts of things happen. The fact that the public may be confused by that construction, by the fact that you'll need to communicate that there is a proper procedures taking place and that it is an essential service. We're also looking at that around things like promotion of the federal gas tax fund and what that looks like in the weeks and months going forward. It is a requirement that you communicate on the gas tax fund, but these are different times. So we're trying to get a sense of that for people as well. I'll just round up by thanking the panel members. If anyone on the call wants to be a panel member, by all means, let us know. If you have questions that you would like to put before these panels or changes, any changes you'd like to see to formats or approach on this, let us know. We have received requests to change the time. That's the one thing I think we're not going to do. But if you cannot conveniently catch these calls, they are now, all 4 calls are up on AMO's website under the COVID-19 page. And we hope to get every week we're able to get the calls up more promptly than the week before. So I want to thank Brittany, who's our lifeline at AMO, for making that happen. And lastly, I just want to thank AMO for letting us do this. We floated this idea to them early on, and they have been fantastic about providing all the support needed to make it happen. So good luck, everybody, in the week ahead. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to the participants, and wash your bloody hands.
Right on.
All right.
Thanks, Brian. Have a good day, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.